This is the first video for topic 2, frequency distributions and percentiles. So you should already have really established some mastery of topic 1. You need to understand summation and basic math, the research process, and you will have need to done topic 1 quiz on Canvas, as well as the first SPSS assignment, which is just reviewing summation and order of operations and so forth. So for now, we're going to start talking about frequency and frequency distributions, right? So this corresponds to chapter 2 in your textbook, creating using frequency distributions. What is frequency? Frequency is denoted by F, and it's just the number of times a score occurs within a given set of scores. N is the total number, N is for number, right, of scores or participants, cases in the study. The distribution is any organized set of data. The shape can be described as normal, skewed, unimodal, bimodal. We'll go on and talk about that later. I want you to notice the mode is just the most frequently occurring number or value in a distribution. Here's the standard normal distribution, okay? This is a theoretical idealized distribution. And we're going to be talking a lot about this, right? In a normal distribution, the mean, which is the average, the median, and the mode are all the same. And that corresponds to right about here. Now I want you to look at this graph for a moment. Right here, this is an F for frequency. This is just the count or number of times a score appears. It's a y-axis, right? Frequency, right? On the x-axis, you have the score, right? So for example, it looks like 30, the test score of 30, right? Looks like this is about the mean, right? You go up here, this is the number of times it appears. This is the most frequently occurring score. Okay, that's the mode. The mean is just the average of all the scores, right? And the median is at the 50th percentile. 50% of the scores are below and 50% are on top, right? Okay, so we will get back to this later. A simple frequency distribution shows the number of times each score occurs in a set of data. Raw scores are the scores we initially measure in a study, or the scores without any sort of transformation. For example, our midterms are worth 50 points, right? So if you get 41, a score of 41 on the midterm, that's your raw score, right? To figure out your percentage, we'd have to divide 41 by 50, and this would no longer be your raw score, right? You understand that? So if we divided 41 by 50, we get out our little calculator, right? And we go 41 divided by 50 equals 0.82 equals 82%. Okay, now it's no longer a raw score. This is your raw score. This is your transformed score. It's transformed into a percent. Okay, here's an example of a data set of raw scores, right? So which is the mode? Anyone? All right, you guys aren't here, so we'll just have to show you. The mode is the most frequently occurring score. In this case, it's 14 because 14 occurs 6 times, right? You can see 15 is 5 times, which is the frequency of 15 is 5. The frequency of 14 is 6. The frequency of 17 is 1. So how do we calculate frequency? As you can see, we just add up at times a number of score occurs within a distribution, right? So we've already been looking at this distribution of scores. We looked at it in the last slide, and we can see indeed here is the frequency of 14. This is a frequency distribution table. You'll just see the scores in order on the left and the frequency with which they occur on the right, right? The frequency of 16 is 0, and so forth. Now, relative frequency is just the proportion of times the score occurs in a data set. So to get that, you just divide the frequency of the score you're interested in by the number of scores total in the data set. So let's have a look at how that would work. Okay. Here is a distribution of scores, right? We can first make a distribution table, right? We have the score here, we have its frequency here, and then we have its relative frequency here, right? So to get the relative frequency of 2, right, there are a total of 20 scores, 1 plus 2 plus 3 is 6, 16, 20, right? The relative frequency of 2, we just divide 10 by 20, and we get 0.5, right? So 50% of the scores are 2. The relative frequency, which we express as a proportion, right, is 0.5. Okay. Frequency adds up to whatever the total number is. So that's the total. This is n equals 20, right? Relative frequency always adds up to 1. So total is 100% of the scores there. Relative frequency of all the scores, okay, must add up to 100% if we're talking about percent, right? So again, we see a frequency distribution here, which we talked about before, and we see that altogether it's 100% of all the scores. Right, moving on to cumulative frequency. Cumulative frequency is just the frequency of all scores at and below a particular score. To compute, you add the simple frequencies for all the scores at and below the score to the frequency for the score. So this includes the score. Sometimes people get a little confused here. So let's look at this a little bit. So if we want the cumulative frequency of 14, all right, let's say, what's the cumulative frequency of CF4? Actually, I think I have animations here, but we'll write this out anyway, just to have fun, right? For 14, well, we have to add up at the score. So 6 plus 4 plus 3 plus 2. Okay, so this is 13. All right, you have to add up everything, including the score that you're talking about. All right, does that make sense? So let's look at another example. So what is the cumulative frequency for 13? 4 plus 0 plus 2 plus 1, right, is 7, right? So we have to have, this is 13. So 4, 4, 0, 2, 1, and the cumulative frequency is 7. All right. So what does it look like in SPSS? So SPSS is going to give you frequency tables, and we will be doing that as part of our lab this week. To get frequencies, you just select analyses, descriptive statistics, and frequencies. And I have an instructional video showing you how to do that. What I want you to notice here is in SPSS, it actually gives you the frequency, which is the count or number of scores in each category. So here we're looking at males and females. Okay, the example so far was numbers, but we're most interested in frequencies when there are categories of data, right? So such as male and female. So SPSS gives us the frequency. It gives us the percent and valid percent. We'll get that in a minute. Percent just would include missing data, and we'll see that. And the cumulative percent, which is similar to cumulative frequency, right? So frequency, valid percent relates to relative frequency, right? And cumulative percent is equivalent to cumulative frequency, right? And this will make more sense when we see a more complex table. So let's look at this one. So this is just to what extent do you identify as liberal versus conservative? And people select it anywhere between very liberal and very conservative, right? So right here, it says missing system. This just means the number of people who did not answer the question. So 9 people didn't answer the question. This is missing data. This is 2.4%, right? So this percent column just includes them, okay? The valid percent is just the people who answered the question, okay? So let's have a look at that. So valid percent, 24. And to get that valid percent, right, we divide 24 by the total of people who answered the question, right? Which was 372, because we don't include those 381, right? And if you'd get out your calculator, which I'm going to do that, even though you guys can't see me, just because you should be doing this, 24 divided by 372, and we're going to get 0.0645, okay? All right? And what SPSS does is it has rounded it up and made a percent. So 0.0645 equals, to get a percent, we move the decimal point over 2, right? So we get 6.45%, which SPSS has rounded to 6.5, because remember, you round 5 up, right? So this is the same as this, right? So valid percent would be the same thing as relative frequency here in the first one, but then cumulative frequency would be over here, all right? Except for instead of being expressed as a proportion, it's expressed as a percent, right? So this is valid percent rather than relative frequency, right? This is cumulative percent rather than cumulative frequency, but you'll notice that here for moderately liberal, this is equal to 6.5 plus 21.5, right? You're just adding these two. I know it's messy. And this is cumulative percent. You would get cumulative frequency equals 0.28, right? We move that decimal place over 2 and we get percent, and that's what's in that SPSS column. All right? Okay, so that should be clear. So on that topic, we'll talk about percentiles, right? This is what SPSS is doing. It's just multiplying by 100 to get the percent, right? Percentiles, percent of all scores in the data that are at or below the score. Go back to this table. This is going to be in the cumulative percent part, right? So here we're not at or below, right? Even though very liberal was coded for SPSS as 1, moderately liberal was coded as 2, and we'll be talking about that in the lab today. Well, not today, but in this topic, you can watch the video, right? So what we have is the same thing as a cumulative percentile. For very liberal plus moderately liberal, it's 28%, right? So this corresponds to this formula. So the percent of the total area under the curve that is to the left of the score, right? So let's look right here. To the left just means at or below, everything below that value, right? And the highest scores, right? The highest score up here, remember in a test like SAT, people might talk about 99th percentile for National Merit Scholar or whatever. And that's those really high scores that are up here with almost everybody below them, right? So moving on, just to repeat, okay? Frequency, right? This is the frequency. Here's our missing data. So we have frequency of each case. Let me get so cumulative frequency for very liberal to moderate is 24 plus 80 plus 38 plus 95, 237, right? Percentile, you'd have to divide that by the valid cases. So on the cumulative percent on SPSS, that's a percentile, but it only uses the valid cases, not the missing data. You divide 237 by 372, right? Which corresponds to that percent right there. Okay, so 63.7% of the participants in this sample, right, identified as very liberal to moderate. And okay, that's good enough for now. Okay. Just note we will not cover group frequency distributions in this course.